And it's 5, 4, 3.
Hey, Alex Simmons. Here he is. Alex Simmons, Chris Ryan with Tell the Damn Story. And
Yep.
this week we're both wearing blue. We are in the New Jersey, New York area. That's all I'm saying. We're not taking sides in case there are fans of other football teams on this opening Sunday.
It's gray
But
Sunday, by the way. Yeah, it's a
it's
gray
very
day.
gray. It's been a gray and disappointing and frustrating rainy weekend. But we started our green room conversation today with a weird and funny promise. I was saying that my backdrop, I'm in the process of evolving this room. And
His den, his study, his
yeah, I used to
sacred
have a
sanctorum.
really big office, and then the kids grew up and demanded more of their own space. And I've gradually gotten pushed back further and further into the smallest room in the house. And we really don't have a lot of house to choose from. It is, this
We'll
is
talk
what it
about that
is.
sometime.
It is what it is. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I was goofing with Alex, talking about I'm eventually gonna have what has been termed by Brian King as a brag shelf. He says you have 3 copies of each book on your shelf, that each book that you did, and that'll be your brag shelf. And I have them piled up, and this will change, and there'll be a brag shelf. And we were talking about, Alex says, what if you have 35 and 40, or I was watching interviews with Stephen King about the great new book he's got out, Holly, and that's like his 65th or 75th book or some nonsense. Yeah, King only, if he even wants a brag shelf,
If
it's
he
only
even
one
needs
copy
one,
per.
people are
God bless
bragging
him.
for him.
Yeah,
He's got people he can hire to do the bragging for
God
him.
bless him. But then it segued into something that I think we should talk about today. So I stopped the conversation, requested that Alex push record, because Alex was talking about back when, was it Megabooks? Yeah, Alex was with Megabooks, and he was plotting for a lot of other writers. And he's plotted how many books, you figure?
I figure at this point in my life, about 65.
About 65 books. And there are reasons for that. And I think it gave us our topic for today. And that
We didn't
is,
have one, right?
our topics got rained out this weekend. That's
Yep.
for another
Yeah.
time, another place. But whatever genre you're doing, there are some requirements to that genre. Now, full disclosure, I have been playing fast and loose with that this summer with my summer project, Soul Scream Anthologine, which is about hybrid horror. I've come to admire horror as one of the more versatile genres out there because it blends well with everything. And that's part of what this has been. Alex gave us a story about Mary Day, Aaron Blackjack Day's sister. And I don't know if tried and true horror fans would say that's a horror. But for me, in this hybrid horror experiment, the idea of racism, the idea of greed, the idea of murder are horrific. So that was the one of the point I'm trying to make with Soul Scream. Whatever makes your soul scream has a bit of horror to it. It comes from Mary San Giovanni saying in a class that all the best moments in literature tend to have some horror in them. Think about Romeo and Juliet or Macbeth or whatever. Having said that, you still need to respect the requirements of genre. And Alex was talking about having written something like 65 plots because the authors that he had or that he was working with may not have known requirements of genre. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
And to wrap that into the envelope or the blanket of nurturing that we tend to do with writing and writing experiences, it's really about us as writers trying to find, especially as emerging and aspiring writers, trying to find where our skills and our interests and our passions fit, and then learning the rules or the structure or the framework of that particular genre or arena, whether we're going to eventually, like a jazz musician, start messing with it or not, but at least initially to understand those elements, what one might normally expect from it, and then what can I do with that? So yeah, this was funny. Megabooks it's what was called a book packaging company, a small book packaging firm run by Pat Fortunato and Diana Giussepone. And they the basic premise of Megabooks was major publishers like Simon and Schuster and Bantam, Doubleday, Dell, and people like that would hire organizations like Megabooks to corral writers to work on specific projects. And so our job was to generate plots, scripts. If the books that we were working on contained art, we had to hire artists as well, and art direct them with their particular end of the project, and basically put together all of the elements of the book, the package of the book. And then, of course, the publishers would get their say in this. They get to yay or nay it and ask for this and deny that and all that. But the bottom line was, once it was finished, they would take it and they would do the publishing, and we would get a check, which was really nice. But we had a number of writers who were established writers. They weren't celebrities, but they were professionals. They'd been paid for different assignments within, in this particular case, the middle grade, which is kids 8 to 12, and the YA, which is young adult, so that's 13 to 18 or so. These two arenas is where most of the writers that we were dealing with had plied their trade. And some of them maybe even had a book that did really well. But at some point, many of them made an assumption that because I was able to write this sort of slice of life story, or this sort of coming of age story, or this new kid finding his or her way through life story, that I now knew how to write anything. And it wasn't even necessarily a brag, although some of them did. But making that assumption, they then were taking an assignment from us to write a mystery story. And as Chris and I have gone through the explanation and sometimes a demonstration of the elements of a particular genre, mystery stories usually involve a victim, an assailant, or a thief, or a crook in some way, shape, or form, usually clues that your sleuth, so that's the 4 elements, your clues that the sleuth can follow back to finding out who actually did it, and then whatever the ending of your story is, arrest, runaway, whatever. So those are 4 specific elements. And within writing the story, you have to lay out those clues in what we tend to consider a fair way, so that your audience, if they're paying attention, actually could maybe figure out the mystery before the hero does. And if they don't, okay, that's still fine. They can still go, oh, I missed that when she said, or they did, or whatever, but it's authentically in the story.
As long as it's fair play, none one of those rip-off cliffhangers switch the story around. You saw him, the whole car went off the cliff. On the next episode, he jumped out just before.
Yes,
get out of
going
here.
at 85 miles an hour, and he didn't tear his suit.
So as a plotter, you get a story in from someone who clearly didn't plot in the genre. So what was your challenge? What was your job? How did you do this? There has to be equal parts plugging in the expectations of the genre, but also not alienating or insulting or crushing the writer. How do you do both? What was required in both parts of that job?
Let me start out by saying that the circumstance wherein I was brought in to plot out a story differed depending. So the situation you're talking about would be that a writer had come up with a plot. The plot had been okayed, because the plot is basically, a paragraph or 2, or maybe a page that says this is what's going to happen in the story, but not a lot of detail. And then because this person is an established writer, the storyline seems fine, so they get an okay to go ahead and write it. But when they turn in the manuscript, as we were just saying, the mystery is not really a mystery. There's a crime, there's a lot of stuff happening, and then a final at the end, a reveal. This is the person who did it. And how we got to that is non-existent. It's like a guess, and oh, you're right, which is
So
not.
what would you do in those?
That's where I'm going. So the first off, the script would come in, we would read, we would find a problem, and so initially you would talk to the writer, point out what was missing, and give them a chance to go back in and fix that. We give them some instructions, some clues and ideas and things like that. And if they say they got it or they seem to get it, fine. They would get another 2 weeks to go back in there and fix it. If it comes back again and no, it's not working, then it becomes more hands-on from what you would have to call the editorial staff. And I was a part of that, in that they would then say to me, okay, Alex, how do we do this? How's this story constructed? Where can there be clues? What would you base those clues on so that we can fix this? So I would then, once again, have to read through the story. Now, my technique maybe is different from others, but my technique was find out what was established in the story by the writer, because I am trying to be respectful to the work that they did. And then ask the questions that would get me to the clue that would be involved. For instance, if they were in a location where the crime took place, let's call it a burglary, right? Okay, what's this space like? What does this space contain? What has the writer put into the story that I can use? And I would make a note of that. The next thing I would say is, what's the thief like? What kind of personality does this person have? What kind of knowledge and skill set do they have? Again, if it's a burglary, did they have to crack a safe? Or was it something more smash and grab or whatever? So I would get that information. And then I would look at where the crime supposedly took place. And I would look at what was done after that, what the thief did, what the victim did. And I would find places where I could organically establish a pattern of clues. So again, if it's a matter of the thief had to have a certain set of skills, I would then go back and look at the character that was created and find an organic way for the writer to indicate bits and pieces of that information along the script. I would find places where the thief might have made a mistake, said something they shouldn't have, or done something that left a clue, and I would indicate where that would go. So I would have to walk through the story, walk through the crime, and then figure out how one could deduce who did it. Right. So that would be one of the things I had to do, one of the techniques I had to do in terms of working with fixing that kind of story. And then we'd go back to the writer, who would either plug and play my suggestions, or if the writer was, by this point, had other deadlines or just somehow couldn't seem to get it, then we as the editorial staff would insert these things, do a rewrite, and yeah, because the bottom line is you got to turn this over to the publisher ready to go to press.
Yeah. When I wrote my, I don't know, I'm still hesitant to say the characters' names because of the ghosts of lawyers past. I would say, though, they were hardly boys, but I worked with the late, great Bill McKay.
Yeah, yeah.
And his technique was, oh, I love what you've done here. Have you considered? Or let me ask this about that moment that you wrote, that great moment or that piece. He always would have that sandwich technique: compliment, question, compliment.
Mm-hmm.
And he drew out the things that were not quite there yet in that pleasant way. And you were really had a long history with Bill and were close with Bill. I think you understand much more than I might be able to express the Bill McKay friendly professor style.
And the really interesting thing is,
yes, that's exactly
that's a Bill line. That's Bill
yeah.
line.
And it would always present as this great opportunity I would want to take advantage of at this point in the story. You don't want to miss out on this, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And which is the reason I pointed out, and because I know how you are, and you are always a very positive person to work with, and so was Bill. But the stereotype of editors
Oh, yeah.
is this, oh, this sucks. Ah, how you call yourself a human being, and you can't even get past, what's it, was it human service, human relations, human services, what is that part of the corporation?
Oh, yes. I know what you're talking about. Human resources or
Human resources. You
yeah.
can't get past human resources with that, because people, especially younger generations, would be like, what is this? This
Yeah.
abusive behavior. So please know that when you enter this and will be working with an editor, most of the time you're going to get constructive, supportive criticism.
Let me piggyback there because Chris is
And
right.
then I'm going to tell you the nightmare.
It's supportive criticism and critiquing and direction is what you want, is what you need, it's what
Right.
we need
Right.
to achieve our best. And the best editors, that's their goal, to help the writer to help the writer get where they need to go so that everyone succeeds. The challenges that you will run into will be editors who are not trained properly or do not necessarily have the right demeanor or style, and subsequently come from, as Chris is pointing out, either an abusive point of view, or the other one can be where they really don't know the answer either, but they're not going to tell you that. And subsequently, they're going to keep shoving it back in your hands and go, no, it still needs to be fixed. You got to figure it out. You got to figure it out. So part of your goal as writers, if you have the option, is to try and work with people who get it. We're in here to everybody to do their best, bring their A game to the best of your ability. I'm going to help you achieve you. If you can get into that kind of scenario, that's great. If you're working with an editor who comes from any other direction that's not more supportive, but is the criticisms are valid, then build up a little bit of armor to whatever may feel
Right.
uncomfortable. But
Mhm.
check out those critiques and apply them, because that's still going to get you where you need to go.
And the goal is twofold. One, we should all practice getting over ourselves. I remember fondly this wonderful student. She was a good writer in a creative writing class I was teaching, who said, "Who are you to edit my work?" I said, "That's my job.
Yeah.
That's why I'm here." I said, "I think this story has a lot of potential, and I think these areas are things for you to consider. I'm not going to change a word." So luckily, this is just for a grade, and it's I would say it was like a B or C plus or a B or maybe even a B plus. So it wasn't that far off. I said, but if you said that to a publisher, an editor, they have a mountain of stories behind them. You got to learn a little give and take. I wasn't as successful with that woman. She dropped that class and then signed up for a drama class I was teaching the next year, and walked out the first, very dramatically, walked out because, oh, you have to get over yourself and be, all right, my goal is to be the best I can be. And I've always told the story about the comic strip that I wrote for Badass Mofo magazine with you, where you changed every line of dialogue. And it was, you had a choice there as the writer. I had a choice there as the writer. Do I take that as an insult, or do I compare the original script with the nuances that you, and that's where I went off, and that's where I could learn, and that kind of thing. And similarly with Bill McKay, I I realized this was an opportunity I hadn't had before. So try and learn, and then and express yourself from there.
That's a great way
Um,
to approach it too. Absolutely.
Art Taylor is a great writer, but also a great editor. And his big thing with me was like, make your identifiers do more. Because he replied, he's like, make it do more. It was one of the best lessons that I had from an editor. So there is great opportunity to learn. Now, there's another side of that coin.
Yeah, but before you go to that side of that coin,
Stay tuned for the other
again,
side of that coin
right? But yeah,
after this message from Alex.
let's stay on this side of the coin for a moment. Now, that's a great moment there to expand on. Make your identifiers do more. How?
If you said, how am I going to eat this cake? She asked. The question itself infers asked, right? How am I going to eat this cake? Betty pushed the plate away. You're making it do more. You're still identifying the speaker as Betty, but you're seeing more. He hated Charlie chuckled. You can't talk and chuckle at the same time, those kind of things. So whenever it's always he chuckled afterwards or this or that. McTavish has this great gravelly chuckle because he's basically a skeleton. And I'll add that in after he says it. Followed it up with that chuckle of his or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to, and it's not something I pay attention to in the first draft. So I commit that sin a lot in the first draft and then redeem myself. All right, what can I have she, they, him, whoever do?
And you approach that when you're going back for rewrites.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I don't get hung up on it in the first draft.
Why?
Because you're just getting the story in the first draft,
Right.
and you can allow it, you can let it suck, just get it done, and then this is part of the process of getting it better. Just to be clear, you don't let it suck and give it to your editor. This is a personal.
They will
suck.
tell you, "Oh, this sucks."
This is a suck just for you. It's you got to go through it, and again, it's a great exercise in getting over yourself. All right, how can I have this sentence do more, or how can I do more with less, words? Take out the overwriting and let it be more streamlined.
One of the things that a lot of writers have to wrestle with, and when I say a lot of writers, I don't mean just emerging or inspiring, struggling writers who have been doing it for a while, sometimes we get hung up on this thing, is it's painful to read something that we wrote that sucks. Sometimes, oh, geez, oh, man, that's a lousy, God, did I write that?
Yeah, but you got to take that as an opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. I've never played football, despite my size. I like my knees the way they are. And you're playing football, you love the game. Okay, great. You love having huge, big-bodied, muscular people slam into your body at full force? Yeah, you do. Okay, it's a part of the game. I think it's the same thing with writing. No, they don't slam into your body full force, but you've got to learn to take the hits. Yeah. You've got to learn to hear what doesn't work or read what really didn't work. But that's okay because you now have the opportunity to go in there and change it, fix it, or whatever.
I'm going to add to your football analogy.
Oh, good. Good.
I have a friend
Good.
Who is he's retired from all the other jobs he's doing, and he's reffing high school sports games. And volleyball is great because you stand on kind of a platform in the middle, just look and make your calls.
Mm-hmm.
Football, he's on the field. I think he's holding the chain. He's one of those guys. So he's really close to the action. And he says, might be too close. It's harder to enjoy watching these people slam into each other. And I would equate that with your editorial experience, right? You may come across an editor that wants to push you further than you're willing to go. I think here is where you kill the dog.
It's an interesting metaphor.
No, that's what they say. There's the editor wants you to kill the dog in the story, right? Or you know what? Let an errant bullet kill the baby. Then you have to be prepared to say, let's discuss this. And I believe it's valid to say, that's not me. If you want someone killing babies in your stories, you hired the wrong person, but you have to be ready for that. And I use that as an extreme example. There's not a lot of editors out there saying kill the babies, but it's the other end of the spectrum, right? When someone's saying make your identifiers do more, that's not insulting. And it's not testing your morals. If someone's saying, here's a great opportunity for you to kill the whole family, it's not insulting. It's an editorial suggestion. You can't take it personally, but you can take it professionally. is that where you intended the story to go? And the conversation isn't F you, I'm not doing that. It's wait a second, is that the story you're looking for? Where in my resume did you see something that would lead you to believe that I was the person to write that story? I'm not prepared to go that far. I think we can do this and have creative alternatives. But
With all that, let's swing back to the
other
other
side of the coin,
yeah. Again, back to the plotting.
I mean that as being part of the plotting experience. Your editor is most 99% of the time going to be giving you positive, constructive things to clarify, to put the points of the story in, such as where the hell are the clues in your mystery? They're going to say that much more positively. But there are stories that are going to more extreme these days. You got to be ready for who you are. Knowing who you are is part of the gig, part of the game.
Absolutely. And again, also identifying what elements belong in a particular genre that you're trying to get into, you're trying to explore. Like you were saying earlier about the Soul Scream, it's not splatter horror, it's not extreme horror. It's a very particular genre of horror or level or grade of horror that you are.
It's actively and consciously going against what is growing and popular trend these days, which is more extreme.
But
I don't think you can hand your nephew, and most people can't hand their nephew some of the extreme horror that's out now. But
and if
you
they
can
do,
definitely hand them Soul Scream.
yeah, if they do, that says something about them, and that's a whole nother discussion.
And I'm sure that in some families that's valid.
But yeah. Again, the situation with plotting someone else's story, the other end of that is, for instance, there was a situation where, and this is for middle school, so you're talking 8 to 12-year-olds going to do this read. Sometimes I would come up with a plot for the writer. They couldn't think of one, or for whatever reason, someone needed me to supply the plot for them. In one case, I supplied a plot and I broke down who's the victim, what the crime was, where it happened, and who the sleuth, in this case, was several people working in tandem to solve the problem, solve the crime. And I put down what they basically needed to find in order to solve the case. And so this was maybe like a 3-page plot description because they needed a little bit more information. So fine, gave it to them. And they went off, and 2 weeks later, they turned in the script. And they turned it into the editors. I wasn't working on the project at that point. I just plotted it. And they turned that over to the client's editor. And it came back with a lot of distressing notes. And so I got called in, and they said, we've talked to the writer. We've shown them the notes, our notes as well as our client's notes. They don't feel that they can do anything about this. They feel that they've written a good story here, blah, 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 blah. Would you take a look at it because you plotted the story? I said, yes, I did. Okay. So I took a look at it, and it's clearly one of those situations where the writer did not understand the mechanics, and there are mechanics, of what I would call an authentic mystery story. They did not get it. They did not understand how clues are laid out. They didn't understand timing in that. And that's fine. They can write many other things, but this was not their wheelhouse. And when they saw the notes, they didn't open up to, oh, okay, I wrote a story, and if this were not a mystery, there would be far less notes. But because this was supposed to be a mystery, a whodunit, these are the things they need me. They didn't take it that way, and subsequently said, no, especially for what I'm getting paid, I'm not going to do any more rewrites. So they said to me, would you do the rewrites? And I said, yeah, but there's a lot of problems here, and I'm not sure that I can just do what they were asking, which was quick patch and fix, because it was close to the deadline for this going in and getting worked on, all that. So I said, I really don't know if this is going to work. And they said, no, you got to do it. You got to do it. So I took it home. and worked on it for 5 days straight. And when they asked me to turn it in, I said, I need a few more days because this is really problematic. And they said, no, you got to turn it in. I said, I really need a few more. I'm not finished. They got a little upset with me, but they gave me a few extra days. I turned it in. And then I got yelled at by the editor that I was working under for turning it in late and jeopardizing such and such. And I thought, wow, that's really not the reaction I expected. And there was some dialogue. Now, this is a lesson in what's professional and how you handle it, because what was being said to me was not vulgar or anything like that, but they definitely did not understand what I had just done or where I had to go in order to get this done. And so it hit a sore spot, but I had to remain as professional as I possibly could. So I did that and I left the meeting. And a day later, having read the material, they and their associates called me in and they said, we're sorry. We didn't realize that you had to rewrite the entire story in 8 days. And I said, yes, I tried to tell you. Every time I went to patch something, 2 other chapters or 3 other chapters fell apart because they were missing these connectors. And so I literally had to work through the entire manuscript, rewriting major portions of the entire thing. Once again, yes, an apology. You're not always going to get an apology, but when you're working with the right kind of people, everyone recognizes where they fumbled. Yes, if I had been late on the deadline just because I was screwing around or I just took too long or whatever, then I have to accept that I was late. I missed the deadline. In this case, the editors were saying, we didn't understand how much work you had to do. And they were saying, we were wrong in terms of how we approached this with you initially. And the story went through, and that's fine. But again, it talks or speaks to the fact that whatever genre you're working in, whether it's horror or comedy or mystery, there's a framework. There are elements and there's a framework that goes with that particular genre, that particular style. You can play with it, but you need to know what it is to begin with so that you can be respectful and maybe establish some of the tone and the mood. But like Chris is saying, if you don't want to go to splatter, you don't have to.
Right.
There's 30, 40 years of horror that's been established in books and film where you didn't see disemboweling and things like that, because what goes on in your imagination when something goes off camera and you hear a pathetic scream or the lights go out or whatever, your imagination can terrify you a lot more than some of the imageries they can throw on the silver screen.
True. One brief thing, and then I want to ask you, as a fix-it guy, as an editor here, as someone who has rewritten, but the other thing is that when my camera keeps slowly moving over,
slowly
it's really obsessed with that side of the room for some reason. It's so funny.
It likes the sun.
Yeah. If it goes over one more time, I'll show you a thing that's there.
It's doing it now.
It is. It's really slow. We'll see. It has to.
Drifting.
The camera has to make it to the thing that I've been choosing not to see, or else I won't show it. All right. Editors must be helpful, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you saw where you had to take some heat, and then they came back and apologized once they realized what they were doing. I had an experience where, because there was a big dream involved, selling a screenplay, I really let myself stay on the hook far longer than was professionally sound. I had 15 meetings with this producer who was from a film writing school, and he had chosen a few to develop, and he was always coming saying, here's the latest in negotiations with Schwarzenegger. It's between me and something called Total Recall. We all know how that turned out. But he would say about my script, a couple of things. One, it's great. It really moves. I love the characters. And then he would say, it needs more clarifying. It needs more work. And about 6 meetings in, I started saying, okay, but you have specific notes. I don't want to do your job for you. I don't want to write it for you. So I was sent back kind of fishing for where it needed to be.
Mm.
You really have a right to ask for direction and for what's the area. So just be aware of that. Okay, it's moving this, the camera's moving this way. So we'll end this episode with a reveal, okay?
Okay.
I want to ask you one question. Sometimes the public turns on a classic story form. Case in point, and of course it was before all the strikes, but there is, and you have to take it with a grain of salt, or in this case, a couple of tons of salt. There's a section of social media that slams Marvel movies, for example,
Mm.
as all telling the same story. They are the hero's journey, which has been retold for thousands and thousands of years because it's a core human experience. But let's put you on both the writer and as the editor. If an editor told you it's just the hero's journey again in a story that you were contracted in a genre that lends itself to the hero's journey, how would you deal with that?
That's wow. That's a broad stroke scenario.
You're welcome.
Let's say that if I had been called in to write a script, a screenplay, and I wrote the adaptation of Lord of the Rings and got that comment, again, trying to be professional, I would have said, here are the elements that are involved in this story. Here's the goal that our lead protagonist has set out to accomplish. Here are the barriers between, or the conflict between, our lead character and his final goal.
Right.
So in order for me to tell that story, this character has to go through trials and tribulations to overcome the conflict to achieve the goal. That becomes what is classically known as the hero's journey.
Okay.
The only way I could expand on that is by maybe spending a little bit more time dealing with the character's psyche or flaws or some of the supporting characters in terms of where their heads are and how they see this. But other than that, what else would you say, or what do you think you're seeing that I could do that would maybe enhance this and make it still what it has to be, but something that you're more satisfied with?
All right. I'm going to follow that up, switching away from the Lord of the Rings. This was actually a Kevin Smith experience with a producer of what would have been a Superman movie.
Okay.
And Kevin was hired to write a screenplay version of The Death of Superman, famous DC comic. So he hit the points and he gave it in. As I remember, I'm really paraphrasing. And the producer came back and says, there's a couple of things you need to know before you rewrite. One, no costume. Two, no laser vision. Three, Superman doesn't fly. What do you do? Now, if you're going to put Alex Simmons in where Kevin Smith was, what do you do?
I first ask questions. I'm sorry. No costume, no laser vision, he doesn't fly. So this is a variation on the Superman myth? Is that what you're looking for? What is the story that you want to tell, and what characters are you seeking to utilize? I would probe for a clearer understanding of what that person, what their vision was.
Right.
and then determine whether or not I was suited to write it.
Beautiful. Now, the reason I brought that up was because you are very good as remaining positive when things get weird, as we have demonstrated together on Tale of the Damn Story quite often when I go off on something.
Yeah.
So I offer that up as ways to deal with curveballs coming in your negotiation with editors and with your experience with editors where you may not be on the same page. Do the Alex Simmons, stay calm, ask questions, find out if the assignment you believe you're doing is the assignment they want. That's very different than what we started with, which is they didn't know the points of the genre, they didn't know how to write a mystery. So we've given a full range of how to deal with editors and how editors deal with you on in the process of telling the damn story.
And in coming back and tying a little bow on all of that too, I would add that in plotting stories, whether you're doing it for yourself or for other people, obviously when you're doing it for yourself, you have a lot more freedom. You're not trying to please anybody but you.
Right.
Doing it for other people, either another writer or another editor, or an editor rather, then it's a matter of being clear that you're doing it to serve or service them. So there's going to be some sort of framework or maybe corral that you have to move around within. And if that's uncomfortable for you, then you get to make the decision to not be there.
Right.
I think one of the things that's a challenge, especially for when we're starting out, we haven't had enough experience and we haven't built up some armor when we meet jerks or things like that. But one of the challenges is not to get overly emotional about these things. You can go out of the office, get on the train, go home, get in the car, drive home carefully, sit down on your couch and go, but not there.
Right.
There, you want to exit with the same dignity that you walked in. And you want to build a reputation as being a professional, a person who you can talk to, who goes for clarity. And then if you get the assignment, who delivers. And when they have a problem, they bring it up. These are things that will work for you. So definitely try and center yourself and don't leap to a reaction per se. Try and get more information so that whatever your response is, it comes from a position of clarity, and you've had a second or two or a minute or two to say, okay, I'm about to say X. How will that serve me?
Right.
Okay.
Because we can offer the Craig Ferguson 3-question formula. Does this need to be said? Does this need to be said now? Does this need to be said by me? And he said he applies that to situations in his marriage. But you can apply it. I find that you can apply that in many instances. Yeah.
Yes, less dangerous ones.
Yeah. All right. I think we're at the end of our episode.
Yes, we are.
And I promised that I would see what the camera was so desperately trying to show you today.
So foreshadowing here.
Yeah, it's foreshadowing. So here's the payoff. So as you spent the summer coming out with Soul Scream anthologies, and I've been putting together a series of images to help sell it. And of course, I couldn't help but try and get to a little humor. There are at least 2, if not 3, folk magic stories spread throughout. So I was coming up with something. I love going to like the dollar store and walking up and down the aisles, just seeing anything that's there and how I can use it. So I saw this guy and I said, with a little paint, I can make it. I can make a guy look. Where are you? Look like me. Right.
Yeah.
And then I can apply a little folk magic.
Oh, jeez.
So we will have a publicity photo where it's laying down on this, but in the backyard, I think. And I'm laying down dead, just in the background. Don't let this happen to you. Read Soul Scream Anthology, that kind of stuff. So that's why the camera just really wanted to show you the miniaturized version of me. There you go. So
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. And you know what? It also is a great way to end because try and keep some humor and some positivity in your life as you pursue your dreams, most assuredly.
thank God. Thank God you went that way, because if you said just use voodoo on your editor, it would have been a whole different feel.
Yeah, and people will be coming for us.
That's right. That's
Chris,
right.
as always, a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, sir.
Take care, everybody.
Peace. Keep writing. Tell a damn story.